Welcome back to Skytech-Lens. Today we're diving into Ford's shocking decision to halt key US production lines like the F-150, sending shockwaves from Detroit to DC. This isn't just a business hiccup, it's a massive disruption tied to global politics and tariffs, with real consequences for workers, buyers, and the entire American economy. Buckle up as we break down what Ford's shutdown really means for the future of American auto manufacturing. It all started with a sweeping set of new tariffs on imported steel and aluminum, introduced with the intention of protecting American jobs and revitalizing domestic manufacturing. The idea was simple. By making foreign metals more expensive, US factories would buy American, and workers would benefit. But in the real world, the consequences were far more complicated. For automakers like Ford, these tariffs meant a sudden spike in the cost of essential raw materials, steel for the frames, aluminum for the bodies, and countless other components that go into every vehicle rolling off the line. The result? Ford alone faced an extra $1 billion in costs, a staggering blow that wiped out profits and forced the company to make tough decisions. Executives scrambled to adjust budgets while workers worried about their jobs and the future of the company. The financial pain rippled through the entire organization, from the boardroom to the factory floor. One of the first casualties was the Ford Focus Active. Ford had planned to import this model from China to meet growing demand in the US, but with tariffs making each car significantly more expensive, the math no longer worked. The project was abruptly canceled, leaving dealerships empty and consumers with fewer choices. It was a clear sign that global trade tensions were reshaping the auto industry in real time. But the impact didn't stop there. The tariffs sent shockwaves through the entire supply chain, driving up costs for parts and materials sourced from around the world. When a single supplier's warehouse caught fire, Ford was forced to halt production of its best-selling F-150 trucks. The incident exposed just how fragile and interconnected the modern automotive supply chain had become. One disruption, and the whole system ground to a halt. Suppliers, logistics companies, and assembly plants all felt the pressure as delays and shortages rippled outward. Investors took notice and panic quickly set in. Ford's stock price tumbled as Wall Street analysts questioned the company's ability to weather the storm. The uncertainty sent shockwaves through the financial markets, with investors fearing that the company's entire business model, built on global sourcing and just-in-time manufacturing, was suddenly at risk. The pressure was on to find new solutions, but the path forward was anything but clear. This crisis wasn't just about a single car or a single company, it was about the very foundation of American auto manufacturing, an industry that had long been a symbol of strength and innovation. Now that foundation was shaking, as companies across the country struggled to adapt to a rapidly changing global landscape. The rules of the game had shifted overnight, and no one was immune to the fallout. As the assembly lines fell silent and workers stood idle, it became clear that trade tensions had brought the industry to a standstill. The story of Ford was just one chapter in a much larger saga, one that would shape the future of American manufacturing for years to come. What does this mean for you? Higher prices. Tariffs on steel and aluminum pushed up the cost of every new car, hundreds, even thousands more per vehicle. For families, that's the difference between buying new or holding on to an old car. As Ford raised prices, so did GM and Stellantis, squeezing buyers and slowing sales across the industry. Dealerships, many family-owned, felt the pain as cars sat unsold, rippling economic stress through local communities. The sticker shock at the dealership is just the start. The whole market feels the squeeze. When Ford halted F-150 production, thousands of workers were suddenly laid off. These aren't just numbers, these are families, mortgages, and entire communities at risk. Every assembly line job supports several more in the local economy, from suppliers to diners. The economic ecosystem built around these factories starts to crumble when production stops. Ford's losses ran into the hundreds of millions, forcing cost cuts and threatening even more jobs. Industry experts warned that tariffs could cost up to 750,000 US auto jobs. The very policies meant to protect American workers put their livelihoods in jeopardy. The US tariffs triggered swift and forceful retaliation from China, escalating tensions between the world's two largest economies. Almost overnight, the global auto industry found itself caught in the crossfire of a trade war that was no longer just about policy, it was about survival. The European Union quickly joined in, slapping new taxes on American-made cars like the iconic Mustang. Suddenly, Vehicles that once symbolized American innovation became targets for tariffs, their prices soaring in showrooms from Berlin to Beijing. For Ford, the impact was immediate and severe. The company faced higher costs to build at home, as imported materials and components became more expensive due to retaliatory tariffs. Workers on the assembly line watched anxiously as management scrambled to adjust budgets and production schedules. At the same time, new barriers to selling abroad emerged. Shipments of American cars were delayed at ports, and customs checks became more rigorous, adding layers of bureaucracy and uncertainty to every export. Ford's global supply chain, once a finely tuned network built for maximum efficiency, was suddenly thrown into chaos. Routes that had been reliable for years were now disrupted, and the flow of critical auto parts slowed to a crawl. Parts sourced from China and Europe, essential for everything from engines to electronics, became either too expensive or hopelessly delayed. The cost of doing business skyrocketed, and the risk of production stoppages loomed large. In response, Ford scrambled to find new suppliers, reaching out to companies in countries unaffected by the tariffs. Logistics teams worked around the clock, rerouting shipments and negotiating new contracts, but every solution came with its own set of challenges. The process was slow, complex, and costly. Every new supplier meant renegotiating prices, retooling factories, and dealing with unfamiliar regulations. The financial strain was visible in the worried faces of employees poring over mounting stacks of invoices and reports. Each day brought new uncertainty. Stock prices fluctuated wildly, and workers watched the news, wondering what the next round of tariffs or countermeasures would bring. The sense of instability made it nearly impossible to plan for the future. Executives gathered in boardrooms, their frustration mounting as long-term strategies were rendered obsolete overnight. The old playbook no longer worked, and every decision carried new risks. The trade war forced Ford to rethink everything about how and where it builds cars. From sourcing raw materials to delivering finished vehicles, every link in the chain had to be reconsidered. In this new era, adaptability and resilience became just as important as innovation. Ford was already in the midst of a massive transformation, restructuring its business to focus on the future of transportation: electric vehicles, autonomous driving, and cutting-edge technology. The company was investing billions in research and development, hiring engineers and software experts, and reimagining what the car of tomorrow could be. Ford's vision was clear: to lead the next era of mobility, not just keep up with it. But this ambitious pivot required stability, long-term planning, and a willingness to take risks on innovation. Then, the sudden imposition of tariffs forced Ford to make a dramatic shift, from a mindset of innovation to one of survival. The company was suddenly faced with rising costs on imported parts and materials, squeezing already thin profit margins. To cope, Ford slashed costs wherever possible, cut thousands of jobs, and put ambitious projects on hold. At the same time, Ford tried to double down on its American roots, investing in U.S. factories and hiring local workers. But the irony was hard to ignore. Tariffs meant to protect American industry actually made domestic production more expensive, not less. The company found itself caught in a web of conflicting pressures. Ford faced a paradox: intense political pressure to build more cars in America, to be a symbol of national strength and pride, while at the same time, the economic reality of tariffs made every American-made car costlier to produce. Politicians toured plants and held press conferences, but the numbers didn't lie. The company was penalized for doing exactly what it was being asked to do: invest at home. Every decision became a balancing act between patriotism and profitability, between public image and financial survival. The trade war's uncertainty made it nearly impossible to plan for the future. Ford's leaders had to ask themselves, should they keep investing in new technology or focus on keeping the lights on? Every dollar that might have gone to innovation was now needed just to stay afloat, to pay workers, and to keep factories running. The financial strain was relentless. Executives pored over spreadsheets filled with red numbers, searching for ways to cut costs without sacrificing the company's future. The pressure was felt at every level, from the boardroom to the factory floor. Ford's leadership was forced to walk a tightrope, balancing the urgent need for short-term survival with the long-term vision that had inspired their transformation in the first place. Every choice carried risk, and the stakes had never been higher. All the while, the ground kept shifting beneath their feet. Headlines changed daily, markets reacted unpredictably, and the future seemed more uncertain than ever. Ford was fighting to adapt in real time, with no clear end in sight. The urgent need to adapt threatened to overshadow the company's push for innovation. Engineers and designers once focused on the next big breakthrough now found themselves grappling with budget cuts and shifting priorities. Through it all, Ford's resilience was tested like never before. The company's ability to survive and eventually thrive would depend on its willingness to adapt, its commitment to innovation, and the determination of every person who called Ford home. Ford has survived wars and recessions, but the trade war exposed a new vulnerability in the global auto industry. The old model of maximum efficiency is now at odds with the need for resilience. Can Ford adapt its supply chains, invest in the future, and survive political crossfire? The company's next moves will shape not just its own fate, but the future of American manufacturing. The stakes have never been higher. So, what do you think? Should automakers prioritize U.S. production even if it means higher prices? Is Ford doing enough to adapt, or is it falling behind? Let me know in the comments. Your voice matters in this conversation about the future of American industry. Thanks for watching. See you next time. Subscribe the channel for more updates.